It has to be something in a person's heart that says, I will not do what's convenient for me or helpful for me. I will actually take a higher set of morals and standards that say a human is a human. Hello there. We've been talking about counterculture. We've been saying that the early Christian church in the first 300 years of Christianity was so countercultural, they were beautifully different. And historians have been able to gather letters and evidence and writings to show that the rest of the world, the non-Christian world, were shocked by the differences of the early Christian church. There were 5 main differences which we've gone through. We spoke about how they had forgiveness and love and reconciliation. They were kind. They didn't bring retribution against people who attacked them or persecuted them. They helped the poor and the suffering. They had a different sexual ethic from the world around them. There was great diversity of race and gender and all sorts of different things. And lastly, their attitude to the preciousness of life. And an historian and anthropologist called Rodney Stark in the 1990s started studying this. He wasn't a believer when he started, and he said, how could such a small, uninfluential group of people affect the whole world so much? You say, well, how did they affect the world so much? Well, within the first 300 years of Christianity, they went from a handful of people, to being half of the Roman Empire's population. And the Roman Empire spanned all the way from the west of Europe, all the way into Asia and down into Africa. It was the world's power, and more than half were Christians by the end of 350 AD. How did this happen? And Rodney Stark said that it was their countercultural nature, but also their communities and the fact that it was spread out. It wasn't one person driving the growth and making all the decisions. Everybody agreed on certain values, and the 5 that we've mentioned are the main ones. And today I want to look at this attitude about the preciousness of life. What we need to understand is that before Christianity came, the culture that Christianity was born into had a very low regard for human life, especially of children, but also of slaves and poor people. People could be killed for very small reasons, and there was no legal repercussion, but especially children. So people didn't like to have girl children. For some reason, they didn't want female children. And so the ratio of men to women in the Roman Empire was unbalanced. For every 5 women, there were 7 men. And the reason was that if a child was born and it was a girl, that they would leave it on a rubbish dump in the city or drown it or kill it somehow. And that was normal and that was legal. In fact, Aristotle and Plato, the great Greek philosophers who everyone holds up in high regard, said it's right and normal to kill newborn babies, but also in the womb. If you don't want a child, they said you can kill it either through mechanical methods, through violence, or through taking certain plants and chemicals and herbs. They had medicines that enabled them to abort fetuses. And so it was very, very, very common in those days. Let me just read you a letter from 1 BC of a husband to his pregnant wife, discovered in Egypt. He said, if by chance you bear a child, if it is a boy, let it be. If it is a girl, expose it or put it out on the rubbish dump so that it just dies by itself. Tacitus, a Roman historian writing in 100 AD, said that the Jewish and the Christian teaching that it was a sin to kill an unwanted child is one of their sinister and revolting practices. He considered it so disgusting that they would call it a sin to kill a child. Seneca, who was a Stoic philosopher in the 1st century, said that infant drowning is reasonable and commonplace. And the early Christian writings show that this was the case as well. There's something called the Didache, which is like a manual for new church members. And it was written in about 100 AD, where they would write down, this is what church is like. And one of their clauses said, you mustn't murder a child by abortion or kill them when they have just been born. And it also mentions sorcery in the same sentence, and the Greek word is pharmakeia, which implies that they were talking about using chemicals and medicines to cause an abortion, and they said that that was wrong and that it should be avoided. Justin Martyr, who was a Christian, early on writing to the emperor, said, "We have been taught that to expose newly born children is the part of wicked men. This we have been taught, lest we should do to anyone an injury, lest we should sin against God, because we see that almost all of those who are so left on the rubbish dump, so exposed, not only girls, but also boys, are brought up to prostitution." And so this world had this terrible situation where a child was vulnerable and people thought nothing about hurting, killing, or abandoning a child. One of the early Christians, a man called Athenagoras, wrote, "We regard the very fetus in the womb as a created being and therefore an object of God's care. We do not expose an infant because those who expose them are chargeable with child murder." Clement of Alexandria wrote, "People keep parrots and exotic birds as pets, but expose their children born in their own homes." And Tertullian, who was a Christian writing in 197 AD, said, "Those who use drugs to bring on an abortion commit murder and will answer to God for it." There are a couple of historians. A historian called Will Durant wrote, "In many instances, Christians rescued exposed infants, baptized them, and brought them up with the aid of community funds." And Rodney Stark, the author that I mentioned earlier, said that eventually the Roman Empire became sympathetic to Christianity's attitudes to child murder. And they did this because of the kindness of the Christians. They were so impacted by the fact that Christians would adopt these children, they would bring them up, and they would grow in their households. Now, why is this important? Why is this such a big deal? You know, it seems so interesting to me that in every society and community around the world where Christianity has not taken root, it is common to allow the killing of children and the ending of pregnancies. It just seems whenever communism has spread around the world, that has been an automatic result. Whenever Christianity wanes in a society, then it just becomes commonplace for us to do this. And I believe that it's very similar to the slavery plague that was in the world. You know, for many, many centuries, for pretty much all of human history, people have kidnapped other people and they have made them slaves. And it was only in the 1700s and 1800s when a Christian revival happened in America and in England and in Europe that eventually, after many, many decades of Christian work and effort, that slavery was abolished. And it was the Christians who were at the forefront of abolishing slavery because they saw in the Bible, in 1 Timothy, it says you must not be a slave trader or kidnap people. In the Old Testament, it says you mustn't take people against their will and make them your slave. And there are all these things. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says, if you're in slavery and you can get out, please, by all means, do so. It was clear it was not part of God's plan. And so we saw that Christians made a change. We see that with the killing of children, Christians, when they affected society in the Roman Empire, then the society's morals changed and the morality around abortion was changed. Now, why is that? Why is it that it just seems to be when people become Christians, they just have a sense of this value, that it's right to protect life? And I think the slavery and the abortion thing are very similar because the rationale or the reason given for why it's okay to have slaves was that slaves are less human than everybody else, that they are less than humans, and even Christians who had slaves somehow rationalized it in their minds. It's the same with racism in South Africa and various other countries. They rationalized it in their minds that these people are less human or less than human, and so it's okay for us to do that. And for abortion, it's exactly the same argument. If you speak to someone who says, I believe it's okay for a woman to end her pregnancy, she will say it's not a human. It's a clump of cells. And if you say to her, but you're also a clump of cells, she'll say, yes, but it's got a different name. And that name is the name fetus or embryo. And I say, yes, but every stage of human development has a name. You could call infant or teenager or fetus. It's just a human in a different stage of life. But somehow they have rationalized it that is not a person. That is not a human being. And that when a woman is pregnant, there isn't two people involved. There is not the mother and the baby. There is just the mother. And so she can decide what to do. And it's the same argument with slavery. Now, how did slavery get overturned? Yes, there were campaigns and there were pamphlets. The main pamphlet for slavery says something like, they are our brother. They are just as human as us. That was the message they were putting out. And through prayer and influencing the nation, but mainly through many, many more people becoming Christians, it was overturned. And it's the same with abortion. You know, we can campaign and we can try and change the laws, but actually it's a heart issue. It has to be something in a person's heart that says, I will not do what's expedient or what is convenient for me or helpful for me. I will actually take a higher set of morals and standards that say a human is a human. Whether I have the power to hurt them or not, that doesn't make them any less human. Wherever they happen to be located geographically, if they're outside their mother's body or inside, they're still a human. Whatever their level of helplessness happens to be, if they're in a coma and they can't look after themselves, if they're in the womb and they need care, or if they're able to fend for themselves, they're still a human. It doesn't change anything. Even the attitude of the mother to them. You know, you can have two pregnant women and the one mother loves the child in her womb and is devastated if she has a miscarriage. The other one is annoyed and angry that she has a child in her womb. And we say that the one must be protected, the other one, it's okay to allow the pregnancy to end. It's all about the attitude of another human towards that human in the womb that determines whether they have a right to life or not. And all of these things need to be put on a different level for us as Christians, where we say, God creates life. God creates life. And a human being like me or you, no human being has the right to decide when another human's life should end. Let me read you a couple of these verses. Psalm 139, you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. Notice that before the body was even formed, God saw it and said, that is you and that is a person. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God already had a plan for your life before you were made. Now you say, yes, but I was a mistake. My parents didn't intend to have me. Friend, you're not a mistake. God created you and he planned for you from before time. He knew you and he had all sorts of designs and plans and good works that he'd prepared in advance for you. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future, even from when you're in the womb or before you're in the womb. In Jeremiah 1, verse 5, God says to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. God has a plan for every human being. You know, in Exodus 21, there are Old Testament laws about if a person harms another person or steals their property or damages their property, what should the recompense be? And one of the laws in Exodus 21:22 is that if a person attacks a woman who is pregnant and the child is hurt or dies, then there should be an eye for an eye with the person who attacked. In other words, the child in the womb is a human and there is protection for them. And by far the most powerful story for me is when Mary, the mother of Jesus, is just pregnant with Jesus. She has a tiny embryo in her womb. She goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is 6 months pregnant with John the Baptist. It says that as Mary walked into the room, the child in Elizabeth's womb leapt for joy. Now that's so interesting because the child is considered a human and responded to Jesus. Jesus was just a tiny, tiny embryo in Mary's womb, and the John the Baptist baby leapt for joy because there is a human, God in the flesh, walking into the room. Now, for those of us who think that abortion is okay, let me just ask you this. When Jesus was an embryo, a fetus, a clump of cells in Mary's womb, was he God? Was he God? Or did he stay in heaven and just come into the body when the baby Jesus was born? No, he was God because John the Baptist leapt in the womb of Elizabeth the minute that he walked into the room. Friends, we believe that God creates life. The second conception happens, there is a human being with its own DNA, but more importantly, with God's plan and purpose for its life. So what do we do with this? How do we respond to this? Friends, the answer is a couple of things. Number one, we ourselves need to renew and refresh our minds and say, for myself, God, thank you that you were with me. You created me. You had plans for me. You were watching over me. And you loved me from the very moment I was conceived and even before. And that just gives me great peace, Lord. Thank you for that. Secondly, we need to extend that to others. We need to say to other people, that child is a special child. You know, if somebody has a miscarriage, when a woman has a miscarriage through whatever reason that happens, we need to extend mercy and love and compassion and mourn with them because that child has died. You know, when King David's little baby boy died, he said, I will go to him, but he will not come to me. That child has gone to heaven. And yes, they are in heaven and we will see them again, but we need to treat them as human beings and we need to treat them as precious. Thirdly, we need to spread this love, not in an angry way. You know, we could, through anger and force, try and change society's views, but it would be an imposed morality. And it wouldn't really help them. They wouldn't get saved just because they were obeying our rules. Yes, it would protect the unborn children, and that is a very important thing to do. But better than that is for us to both protect the unborn children, but also through love and the message of God's forgiveness and his gospel, try and spread Christianity. Because when the spiritual temperature gets better and better in a society, then morality happens automatically. But then we can also affect society. You know, we can make our voice heard. As the number of Christians in England and Europe and America grew in the 1700s, politics started to change. A man called William Wilberforce became a politician and he campaigned. He became a member of parliament when he was 25, I believe, and he campaigned for decades before eventually slavery was abolished. And it's the same with us. We can campaign, we can work, we can get Christians in positions of power. We can use just plain common sense arguments and say, is there any difference between killing your child after they're born or before they're born? They're still the same child. Why do you think it's okay to kill a child in the womb but not outside the womb? We can use common sense, and we should, but always with love, with grace. Colossians says our speech should be seasoned with salt, which means with kindness, with love, with truth, with logic, but also with humility, saying we're not better, we just believe God is better. And then lastly, we should provide the care that the early Christians provided. You know, they would go to the rubbish dumps and they would pick up these little babies or these young children who had been abandoned there. They would take them in. Out of their own money and their own care and time, they would look after these children, bring them up, and help them to become believers or at least to have a good life. And we should be doing that. We should be fostering children, adopting children, setting up ways for children to be adopted. You know, someone will say to me, I made a mistake and I didn't mean to get pregnant, and it's a terrible circumstance and it's causing me great grief and I don't have enough money, or maybe you were raped or something terrible happened, all I would say is, I'm so terribly sorry for what's happened to you. And I want to help you in whatever way I can. I want to give you support, encouragement, money, perhaps provide a way for that child to be adopted. But one thing I don't want to do is make this innocent child pay for somebody else's mistakes and sins. Why should that child pay because you were raped or because something terrible happened to you? Why should that child suffer? Let's protect the child and also the mother. Let's show compassion. Let's provide easier ways for women to find the help that they need. Rather than aborting, let's provide a way for that child to be adopted, because that achieves the same end result. You might say to me, oh yes, but I have to go through 9 months of carrying this child. Friends, in the big scheme of things, 9 months of carrying a child is worth it if it protects a life and that child is then adopted by somebody else and has a happy and safe life. You know, imagine you were a soldier and you were behind enemy lines with your partner, your friend, your fellow soldier, and he was wounded and he couldn't move, and you had 2 miles to walk back to safety across the border, but you had to carry him. And you were carrying him and he was dependent on you. That's similar to the picture of a woman with a child in her womb who is helpless and needs her help, and she has to just carry that child just for a very short time, a few months, until it can be looked after by somebody else. We would say to that soldier, if he said, you know what, it's my body, it's my choice. I don't want to carry my friend anymore. Nobody can judge me. We could say, you know, you can do what you like. You can legally do this. You can drop the soldier, even though there's just a few meters to go. You can drop them and you can let them just die behind enemy lines. But most of us would say the right thing to do, the human thing to do, is to carry your friend back to safety. Lady, if you're in trouble, I'm so sorry for you. And I don't judge you, but I want to say to you, it's not just you. There is another human being involved. And it may not be your fault that you got into this situation. But we as Christians want to help you. And many, many people want to help you. Please, please, bring this child over the lines till somebody else can take care of them. I just want to close by reading a couple of pieces of writing we have from the early church. So a man called Mathetes, I read this a couple of weeks ago, I'll read it again. He wrote to a friend of his called Diognetus in about 130 AD. Diognetus was saying, tell me about these Christians. What are they like? He said, as citizens, they participate in everything with others, yet they endure everything as if they were foreigners. Every foreign land is like their homeland to them, and every land of their birth is like a land of strangers. He says they seem like foreigners, whatever land they're in. He says they marry like everyone else, and they have children, but they do not destroy their offspring. They do not abort or abandon their offspring. They share a common table, but not a common bed. They have a different sexual ethic. They exist in the flesh, but they do not live by the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws, all the while surpassing the laws by their lives. You know, Peter and Paul in the New Testament both wrote startling passages saying, obey the authorities and do what they tell you to do. And for both of them, when they wrote those instructions in Romans and in 1 Peter, Nero was the emperor who was the worst anti-Christian Roman emperor ever. He was cruel, he was unjust, he was killing Christians. And Peter was killed by Nero, and yet he wrote, you must obey the authorities. He says that they obey the prescribed laws while surpassing the laws by their lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They lack everything, yet they overflow in everything. They are dishonored, and yet in their very dishonor they are glorified. They are spoken ill of, and yet are justified. They are reviled, but blessed. They are insulted, and repay the insult with honor. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if raised from the dead. They are assailed by the Jews as barbarians. They are persecuted by the Greeks, yet those who hate them are unable to give any reason for their hatred. Friends, Christianity spread dramatically. Every 10 years, the Christian church increased by 40%, and it just grew and grew and grew. Not because of a person or a campaign or a special method. It was because of the love and these 5 main values that the Christians exhibited. Let me tell you again what they are. They gave forgiveness and love to people, even those who hurt them. They helped the poor and the suffering. They had a different ethic around sexuality and marriage. They were diverse in many ways, and they accepted all sorts of people. And the preciousness of life was something that they stood for and exhibited and took in those who needed help. We can do the same. Can I ask you, are you different to the people you work with? Are you different to the society around you? We need to mix with them. Jesus told us to be salt and light, but he said if the salt loses its saltiness, it is good for nothing. We need to be different. Salt is different to the food it's on. Light is different to the darkness it shines into. But we need to have proximity. We need to be on the food. We need to be in the dark. We need to be involved in the world. If we can keep that balance, different but involved, like a ship in the sea, we're made to be in the world, but if the sea gets into the ship, if the world gets into the Christian, we are sunk. We need to maintain this balance, and we can do it. At Leading Lights Network, we like to help people start small groups wherever they are, even if they are new Christians. If they are untrained, we want to give you the resources, the support you need, and we want you to form a little community of love where you study the Bible together and worship God together and affect your community. Would you pray about joining one of those groups or leading one of those groups? And look us up on the internet, leadinglightsnetwork.com, and consider helping us financially as well. We love you and we're praying for you. I want to just close by saying if you have sinned and if you have messed up, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. No one is better than anyone else. Just pray this prayer. Say, Lord Jesus, I have sinned and I've messed up. Please forgive me. Thank you that your word promises that if I confess and come to you and believe that you died on the cross for me, you will forgive me of my sins. I ask you to come and forgive me and wash me clean and make me new. And I want to live for you for the rest of my life. In Jesus' name, amen. Let us know if you prayed that prayer. We love you. God bless you.